If you want to provide better security for your data, and possibly if you've got multiple users using the same workbook, you want to be aware of two commands, one for protecting the workbook, one for protecting the worksheet. We're looking at the file 11 protection, and the very first sheet is called worksheet protection. Let's first talk about protecting a workbook. Both of the commands that I mentioned are on the Review tab in the ribbon, Protect Workbook. And this is primarily about the structure of a workbook, moving, deleting, and adding sheets. If we protect a workbook, you cannot insert a new sheet, move a sheet, delete a sheet, and as we'll see in a moment, practically all commands available as we right-click a tab are going to be inhibited. Protect Workbook. Need to provide a password. I know it. I might tell certain others, not others. And if I save the workbook, it stays in this state. Right now, I'm about to right-click on the current sheet tab. Notice how many of the commands are grayed out. Can't use them. And even if I were curious and thought, I wonder if there's a hidden sheet, I don't even know that necessarily because I can't get to those commands. So while it's in this state, can't do this. If I click Protect Workbook right now, well, if I don't know the password, I can't change that status. But of course I do right now. At some point, I will unprotect the workbook. Now, protecting a worksheet probably is the command that you're more likely to want to use. It gives us control in a lot of different ways. And it might begin with something that doesn't seem related at first. If you right-click any cell in Excel and go to Format Cells, if you go to the Protection tab, and by the way, it's not always selected, but we see here the cell is locked. Locking cells has no effect until you protect the worksheet. So probably all the cells in this worksheet, as in most worksheets, it's locked. I'm going to begin by saying the following. Let's unlock everything, because let's say we've got a situation where we want others to be able to make some editing changes to clean up this file, but we want to be careful about not letting them make changes in certain areas. So let's begin by clicking the upper left corner. That selects the entire worksheet. Let's right-click, Format Cells, go to Protection, Unlock. Sometimes, by the way, you'll see that this box is checked or blank as it is now. Sometimes it'll be black, meaning some are locked, some are not. We want to make sure that's empty looking right now. We have unlocked all cells. Now we're going to lock some, meaning we don't want any changes in the following columns. Column E has formulas. You don't need to know the details right now, but it's based on data in column D. We're going to be locking column E, and now I'm holding down the Control key. We're also going to be locking column G. We don't want anybody typing any salary changes there. And let's say column H is maybe even more sensitive. We don't want that visible. So we've got these two columns selected. Right-click, Format Cells. Let's lock these. But for column H, I'm just going to right-click on column H alone and hide it. Now, if we turn on protection, then the idea of a cell being locked or unlocked has some real meaning. Those locked cells we cannot change. All right, we're ready to try the feature, Protect Sheet. And look what else pops up. A whole series of potential questions and answers about, do we want to allow inserting and deleting of rows? Well, we would think that out a little bit and perhaps experiment a little bit. At a minimum, if we want other users to be able to make some changes in the appropriate locations, you must allow Select Unlock Cells to be selected. Let's provide a password. Click OK, provide the password again, click OK. It's now in this state. And by the way, a visual giveaway, if you happen to be on the Home tab, or if you jumped over there, most of these formatting features are grayed out. So imagine this little scenario. The other user is here. This cell needs to be changed to 2004. This is years of service. You can imagine somebody saying, well, if this is 2004, I'll just make this be a 14. Oops, can't do that. We can't type there. That cell is locked. But we can change this to be 2004. Enter. This is my friend, Jim. I think Jim deserves 60,000. Well, I start to type. We can't type there. And I'm wondering what's in that hidden column. I drag across here. There's a hidden column H out there. Right click. Let's unhide it. Well, we can't unhide it. So you've seen various ways to protect the data here. When this is back in my hands, or if that other curious user says, well, I wonder if I could unprotect this somehow. Back to review, unprotect the sheet. Well, of course, you got to know the password. And I do. And now it's back in its so-called normal state. So I've seen different reasons for wanting to protect a worksheet, and prior to that, to protect an entire workbook. Both valuable tools when you're concerned about the security of your data. If you want to allow multiple users to access the same workbook, you'll need to know how to activate sharing and ultimately the ability to track changes by each user. And when we say open at the same time, we're also opening the door to the idea that people could be making changes to the same cells in approximately the same time frame. The feature called sharing in prior versions of Excel used to be found on the Review tab. And when you go to the Review tab in the ribbon, you don't see sharing, but you might see here, grayed out, Unshare Workbook. So how do we share a workbook? We need to add an icon to the Quick Access toolbar. On the right side of the Quick Access toolbar, and most people do keep this above the ribbon, there's a drop arrow. Slide down to More Commands. In this dialog box, choose commands from either commands not in the ribbon or all commands. Slide down into the letter S, and you'll see an option. Share Workbook. It's a legacy feature. We add it to the Quick Access toolbar. As we click OK, we'll see it at the top of the screen. Share Workbook so that others can work in it at the same time, and workbooks containing tables cannot be shared. Let's click this button. Use the old shared workbook features. Now, there is a new feature that is available if you're using Excel for Office 365. Learn more about co-authoring. I'll just click this, and you might want to explore this on your own. A different way of collaboration, which ultimately might have some different features implemented than what we're about to see. It's called co-authoring. I'll close that dialog box for now. We're going to be using the old shared workbook feature. I have this open right now. At the time of this recording, it's August 6th. On the Advanced tab, we make some choices. Ultimately, we are setting this up so that we can track changes, not only by ourselves, but by others as well. Keep changes. We probably want to experiment with the time frame here. We don't have to keep the history. Update changes every few minutes or when the file is saved. Make some choices there. And some of these features will pan out as we work with the tracking feature in the next movie. Let's click OK. This action will now save the workbook. Do you want to continue? I'm going to click OK. Now, the name of this workbook as we opened it was called 11 Workbook Before Sharing. There's only one worksheet on it. We're looking at it. As I click OK, watch the top of the screen. We now see Workbook Before Sharing, but now it is shared. And by the way, a little side note on here. Even though this says shared, this could be a file that only you use. So why would you share it? You share it if you want to keep track of changes. So although it sounds somewhat contradictory and somewhat strange, sometimes you'll set up a file for sharing simply to be able later to track your own changes and nobody else's, because nobody else is using it. So it's a feature that sets the stage for the tracking capability, which we'll see in the next movie. After you've set up a workbook to be shared, you can keep track of all the changes made by various users of that workbook. The workbook we're looking at right now has an unusual name, 11-Workbook After Sharing Set Up, meaning this workbook has already had sharing set up. It's got one worksheet in called Vendor Sales. Now, what we'd like to be able to do is track changes. That's one of the reasons that we set up sharing. Multiple users will be using this. We want to track what changes are being made to it. Now, in prior versions of Excel, you would have seen on the Review tab a Track Changes feature, but it's not here anymore. You might have seen in the previous movie how we resurrected a feature out of the past. We do this by going to the Quick Access toolbar, rightmost button, Customize Quick Access Toolbar. Go down to More Commands, and in this dialog box, choose commands from commands not in the ribbon or all commands. Slide down into the letter T, and we will see Track Changes. It's a legacy feature, just the way Share Workbook is. You might have seen that in the prior movie. Click OK. There we are. Let's click this button for Track Changes. Highlight changes. Now, this might strike you as a little bit strange. If you did not share a workbook, by choosing to track changes, you automatically will share your workbook. Nevertheless, this is a shared workbook. We're going to be tracking changes. And so at different times, you will think out about how often you want to do this. Since I last saved, all, this sort of thing. I'll just leave it at all. If you got multiple users, you could track this down by name. I could check everybody else. Eventually, you'll see a list of other names in here if you allow this to be shared by others. You could narrow down where you want to observe the changes, maybe just in certain columns or in certain sheets, that sort of thing. I'm going to leave the Who box unchecked. Just keep this at all. Highlight changes on the screen. And eventually, we might even want to list these on a new sheet. Let's click OK. This action will now save the workbook. Do you want to continue? Okay, let's do. Okay. I'm going to make a change. For example, in cell D7, this purple should have been blue. I'll just double click in here and change that to blue. And as I press enter, that looks a little different now. I click away from it a bit. Slide over this a bit later. I'm making this change on August 8th of 2018. You see the change and the description of what I changed it from and to. It's going to be handy. The second of the 15s over here has to be changed to a 20. And I'll tab over and make another change. These 4 entries here should all be Wyoming. I've got them all highlighted. I'll type WY. And then because there's multiple cells, I'll press Control-Enter instead of Enter. So I've got some changes there. Imagine we made a few more, and so on. If we go back to the Track Changes button, highlight changes, we could list the changes on a new sheet. But as we click OK, we might be reminded only changes which have been saved can be listed on the history sheet. Okay, let's save this workbook. There's the Save button, Quick Access Toolbar, or Control-S. Now let's come back here, highlight these changes, list changes on a new sheet, click OK. And there we are, a list of all the changes. By the way, you can track changes if you are the only user. You might have a workbook and you simply want to set up track changes so that you know what you've been doing. Maybe others aren't involved at all. But in a real life situation, there probably would be. And so what you also should do is sit down with your co-workers, maybe start off with only 2 or 3 people, set up a test file, kick these ideas back and forth a little bit, change some cells, look back and forth, see what's happening. And there's some other features that we don't have time to get into in detail, but do note as we go back to track changes, we could accept or reject changes as well. And we can look at all of them by everyone. And as we click OK here, we'll have a list. And one by one, we could either accept this one or accept all of them, reject them, and go through the entire list of changes. So I think you see the potential value of this. And so, as we can see, this ability to track changes made to a workbook by multiple users, even if it's only you, gives you that all-important paper trail that we so often need when we work with files in Excel.